From the Daily Slog, please welcome the biting wit and the topical fiery humor of Pinchas Levinson! Whoa, great, okay. Good evening. Good evening. Good evening. Great, all right. Another hand for our MC, please. Yeah, woo, woo. Okay, right. The man said topical humor. Topical humor it is. Big new. Well, one of the big stories of the week, of course, was Moshe Katsav. Prison time for the boy, right? You know? Yeah, it's kind of weird. There are a couple lessons here. One of them, of course, is his neighbor, who's extremely proud of him. You know, here it is. Look at his humble origins. And now he's going to get to sit next to ministers and Chevri Knesset. You know, he's going to be a big boy like the other ones. Okay. And, of course, Tzipi Livni says, well, this is a sad day for the people of Israel, but it's a happy day. And why is it a happy day? Because Moshe Katsav is not a member of the Kadima party. Okay, we should all be happy. She should be happy about that, no? Okay. Oh, tough crowd, yo. So Katsav, of course, is pretty sad. He says, well, you know, the social workers are on strike. How am I going to get my female accompaniment? You know, forget it. It's not going to work. Okay, and of course his lawyer says, well, he didn't throw any shoes. He shouldn't get 7 years. You know, what kind of a criminal is this? And the last issue, of course, that we have to resolve is what is to be done with the presidential statue of Moshe Katsav, right? You know, and feminists, well, look, you know, they tore down the statue in Syria, we'll tear that one down, right? Now, finally, in the end, of course, Paris says, okay, you know what, we'll let him have his statue, but only from the waist up, right? You know, and of course, we'll put him in prison guard.
Where's the statue?
The statue is in the presidential garden. There's a statue of all the former presidents. Yeah, so they were going to get rid of that, and then they said, whatever, they'll leave it on. They'll give him half a statue, as I said. Anyway, the other, another big story this week, of course, is that it's heating up on the southern front, right? You know, and so the Hamas says, well, you know, this is just really misunderstood because this is really just Purim fireworks that have gotten out of hand. You know, I mean, starting with that, you know, the Victoria's Secret, you know, that boat that they intercepted, and it's been fireworks for a number of years, and people just don't understand what's going on. But it really wasn't a very happy Purim, you know. I mean, like there were these kids who dressed up as firefighters, right? And they didn't have any equipment, you know. And the kids who dressed up as Japanese, you saw them, right? They had 3 eyes, you know. It's kind of weird. Anybody following this Japanese story, right? You know.
Is it still in the news?
Yeah, it's still in there. A couple of laughs out of it. Here we go. So of course, the Japanese think, well, this is just a third nuclear attack. You know, I mean, how else are they going to relate to this kind of thing? And of course, the one of the unspoken themes in this is Barack Obama. He's an unspoken theme in everything. But you know, 2 weeks before the BP oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, Obama says, you know, offshore oil drilling is the way to go, right? And then 2 weeks before this disaster, Obama gets up there and he makes a speech. Nuclear reactors are the way to go. I mean, you know, you can see that whatever basically Obama says, forget it. It's not the way to go. For us, it's been okay, this disaster, right? First of all, we've been able to withdraw our diplomats for the first time, and not because of an international incident that we did. It's always a plus, I say. And then, of course, the big gift that we're able to give the Japanese people from Bibi, of course, was the secret plan to build thousands of housing units in a hurry, right? So he gave that to them, and they were all very happy to do that. Yeah, okay, we all build housing units real fast. Okay. And of course, the righties are just saying, well, this is because you supported the Hitnat Kut. That's why you're getting punished for this. Well, it's not going to actually.
We're back.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, welcome, Dave Schmidt, please, for all the rest of the paying audience. Okay, Dave, he's back. He's 2 years. Okay. Anyway, and then of course the Haaretz sent their favorite lefty correspondents, Gideon Levy, right? You guys don't Gideon Levy, whatever. People don't like him. Certainly not this righty crowd. Anyway, right, so of course he gets there, and the first thing he writes, this is the long arm of the Israeli military, and this is what they've been doing, you know, this is the destruction. We're back to Japan, right? And then of course, the righties are all worried that, you know, because of all the radiation, they're going to come back to Gideon Levy's, you know, it's going to be everyone's worst trick. Other news, of course, Sarah Palin was here this week, you know, right? I mean, like, the Jews haven't suffered enough, we have to host her. And of course, there's Bibi's wet dream, 2 Sarahs for dinner. That was really awesome. And then finally, right, she goes to the Western Wall, and she looks at this massive thing, and she says, "Oh, is this how you keep the Mexicans out?" That was her, there you go, that was her take on it.
She said she could see Masada from her hotel room.
There you go, very nice, that was good, very good. And then, of course, other news this week, well, the 73% of Americans, right, don't know what the Cold War was all about, okay? Yeah, well, this is not so surprising because at the White House, they don't even know what the Libyan War is all about. So, not knowing what war abouts it's a classic American tradition. I mean, you remember when Barack Obama says, "I will never be fighting 2 wars at one time," right? Because right now he's fighting 3 wars. I mean, imagine if he hadn't won the Nobel Peace Prize, we'd be in really even better shape. Yeah, okay. And the Pentagon, of course, says, well, this is not going to be a long war, but I wouldn't believe them. I mean, we still have troops in Germany. I mean, what sort of promises can you expect from them? Anyway, the other, of course, what is this war about? It's about Muammar Gaddafi, right? Okay, yeah, there's a couple of funny things there, right? First of all, the poor guy, right? I mean, first, just one humiliation after another, right? I mean, first, his people pick on him, and then he gets bombed on his compound, and now he's getting beaten up by the French. I mean, what sort of indignities can that be, right? And the other phenomenon is as the comics say, he has the Hanukkah name, right? Hanukkah it's a code word for all the goyim for Jewish holidays that they can't spell, right? Because there's like about 75 spellings. And Gaddafi has got that same kind of a name, it's Gaddafi, anyway. So they just decided, well, we'll just knock the guy off, it's a lot simpler than trying to spell his name right. And of course they bomb him from the air because, that colorful turban, that's the easiest way to get to him. Anyway, talking about the Jerusalem Marathon, right, they did have it, and there was a little bit of rain here, okay? But, they got holy water, and that's a great thing about getting rain down here. Of course, last week they had a marathon in L.A., okay, and it also rained, but of course L.A. marathons are a little different because you get to get into your car and you drive around, so nobody really cares about the rain. And speaking of which, out in L.A., Gabi Ashkenazi was there last week, right? He's on his world post-army tour, before his parents had cut back to the university. Anyway, so he's out there, and he's at this sing-along, right? And so he was just horrible, right? So he motivated the Knesset they had what's called a cooling off period, and they passed a law that chiefs of staff cannot sing publicly for 3 years after they're in the army. That was his contribution. Other news, Fuad Ben Eliezer, right, our favorite bloated Knesset member, is getting better, right? And of course he's in a lot better condition than the Labor Party that he left. The scientists this week discovered that both dogs and cats come from the Middle East, right? So, yeah, so you know why we don't get along. It's obvious, They had this Gaza engineer, right? That went to Ukraine to get citizenship. It's still not clear exactly why they gave him the hook, but they kidnapped him and they brought him back here, right? And so all the women's groups are just up in arms because, when they kidnap women to bring them here for enforced prostitution, they smuggle them over the border, right? But when they kidnap guys, they just stick them in a plane and back they show. Anyway, right. Not a happy week for women. Al-Qaida came out with a woman's magazine, right? And it's about everything from fashion to terror, but of course the women aren't allowed to read it. That's the usual story. March Madness, anyone? Yeah, there you go. But of course,
watch some at 6:30 this morning. I couldn't sleep.
There you go. But of course, it doesn't mean much to us here in the Middle East because we have, April Madness, May Madness. Forget it. We're always madmen here. And of course, we can have it's St. Paddy's Day, right? Everyone, what better way to go out and honor Ireland's greatest saint than to, vomit into a green plastic hat, I went out and drank a bottle of green beer. Of course, it turned out to be Scope, but it was really tasty nevertheless. That's what everyone should do on St. Paddy's Day. I didn't know if you flew here recently, right? But the big news, of course, is the TSA, right? Which stands for thousands standing around, all right? Or more recently, it stands for, touching sensitive areas or travelers sexually assaulted. I mean, it's really getting quite invasive, and they sort of code it in this anodyne bureaucratese, what's called enhanced security procedures, right? So these whole body searches, right? They're known as nudoscopes, or they're like, naked scans or strip searches. It's really horrible. Or porn scans. And of course now there's a new noun, right? For those of you who don't want to go through the scan, you can opt out, and you have to declare yourself, I'm an opt-out, and those exact words. And then, we got an opt-out, they take you over to the side, okay? And now you get the pat-down, okay? And the pat-downs are even worse, gate rape or freedom pats, they call them, freedom frisks, freedom fondles, or gropa-palooka, love pats. I mean, the whole thing is just so weird, It's sort of this peeling. It's not going anywhere. Thank you very much. You've been a lovely audience.